Hello, everybody. I am here with Sabrina Bonaiuto. I'm super excited to begin and dive into this conversation. So, Sabrina, I would love for you to share with our listeners a little bit about yourself and your journey.
Sure. Thank you so much for the introduction and thank you so much for having me on this podcast. I feel so honored to not only be on this podcast, but to know you. Gabby and I have kind of met over the past year, right? Through social, and I had the opportunity to get some smoothie bowls with her not too long ago, and now we're connected in this way. So, my name is Sabrina, and I am an Ayurvedic health counselor. I'm a yoga teacher and an essential oil specialist with doTERRA's essential oils. And I'm really passionate about helping people keep health simple and sustainable. I think that it's really easy to overcomplicate having a healthy lifestyle, and especially something like Ayurveda, which we'll get into a little bit more here. So easy to overcomplicate it. And I don't believe it has to be a complicated process. I believe that there's so much wisdom in keeping things simple.
Mhm.
And I do have a background in health psychology. So, just to give a very brief kind of introduction to how I've become so passionate about all of these different holistic practices is through my own story, like many of us do. I struggled so much with my mental health growing up. Anxiety is something that, has run through my family. And I kind of grew up hearing from a bunch of different family members, we just have anxiety in this family and it's just we're anxious and we have mental health issues. And no disrespect at all to my family, but I kind of rebuke that as a title for myself. Not to say that there's anything wrong with having mental health issues. I'm a huge advocate for mental health, but I'm more of an advocate for helping people take ownership of their mental health situations and not being a victim of it, but being able to live productive lives through healthy habits. And it's been through my own story that I've learned that.
Yeah, I love that. And I feel like that's something that is so important because in society, like we do just normalize things and not this was what you were given, like deal with it. Like it is what it is, when really it's like, no, that doesn't have to be your
Mhm.
entire identity. And also, it doesn't have to be viewed as a bad thing.
Right?
Like it can be viewed as a really beautiful gift. So, is that how you kind of then found like more like holistic healing? Was there like a turning point in your life that really got you to that point?
I would say the turning point for me was kind of around my second year of college when I was in my yoga teacher training. Thankfully, I actually wasn't really into sports as a kid. I ran the wrong way on the bases when my parents signed me up for softball, grabbed the ball with my hand that didn't have a glove on it. Like I was just not a coordinated sports kid. But my
Yeah.
parents put me in a yoga class instead. And it was hilarious because neither of my parents have ever practiced yoga. It's not a thing they do, but they were
Yeah.
like, hey, like maybe she'll like this thing. And so growing up, I had this confidence in a yoga practice. And so when I went to college, I reconnected with my yoga practice again. And at this point, I was on medication for my anxiety for years. I was on and off of medication since I was probably an early teen. And also, no disrespect to medication. Although I advocate for holistic health, I more so advocate for integrative health. So, time and place for sure. But I knew for me, I thankfully didn't have that severe of a condition to constantly be on medication. And I knew that. And so I started to notice that as I was practicing yoga, I was being introduced to people who ate healthier and I started eating a little bit healthier. And then I started noticing that, hey, I feel better. And I don't recommend this, but I just took myself off of my medication and I started realizing, oh my gosh, I feel so good. I feel even better than when I was on medication. And, I definitely at this time started questioning, for better or worse, how no one ever asked me what I was doing with my diet. No one ever asked me about my lifestyle or how much sleep I was getting on a nightly basis when I would go to my doctors growing up for my mental health. And that was a problem for me. I was like, that's an issue. There's an issue that no one ever asked, but it was so quickly, a prescription was so quickly written.
Mhm.
And I think that that's a huge problem right now in our society and something I'm really passionate about advocating on. And so I'd say, yeah, around the college years when I was introduced to healthier habits was when I had that shift of it doesn't have to be this way. And I also kind of like you said, like there's gratitude for my mental health. I'm so grateful for my anxiety because it's connected me with all of these different
Yeah.
modalities of healing. And I don't know what I'd be doing without it, truthfully. I don't think I'd have the passion that I do to help people. I don't think I'd be as empathetic as I am and compassionate for other people as I am and care about humans the way that I do.
Yeah, thank you so much for sharing that. There's such a power in like growing through what you go through. And I truly believe, like myself too, of like the things that we went through that a lot of times at the time we kind of deemed as quote unquote bad or whatever, actually were really beautiful, like divinely orchestrated things in our lives that were bringing us to something that maybe in the moment we didn't see, but like just give it a few years, give it a few years, and all of a sudden it makes perfect sense why you went through that. And like, I'm very much that firm believer in kind of like walking your talk. Like you had to go through those things in order to be able to help other people. And I feel like there's no better time than now. Like so many people are starting to make that shift, starting to really seek other healing modalities, starting to kind of sit on like, wait a minute, something doesn't feel right here. Wait a minute, this doesn't fully feel in alignment, or something that used to work for me no longer is working for me in that sense. So I guess my next question would be what stood out to, well, I guess what stood out to you about Ayurvedic healing compared to other healing modalities? But also on top of that, which did you dive into first? Like obviously it was yoga, but then was it essential oils or was it?
Yeah. So it's a really good question. So what stood out to me about Ayurveda, I learned about it in my first yoga teacher training. So at this time, again, early second year of college, I'm being like mind blown left and right. I'm like, oh my
Yeah.
gosh, I had no idea. And so I learned about Ayurveda and I loved so much the individualized approach that Ayurveda has.
Yeah.
And then I learned that Ayurveda is the world's oldest system of medicine in which all others are built upon. And then I was like, oh, so Ayurveda is like the real deal root of where all of this started. So that's what I really want to study and dive into. And I was just kind of infatuated by it at first, and I let myself marinate and being excited about it for years. I didn't jump right into my
Mhm.
Ayurveda certification until years later, after my second yoga teacher training. So I took a lot of time with it, which anyone listening who needs that, there's something to be said for giving yourself time
Yeah.
and not rushing the process of your career or your growth, because I don't think I'd be where I'm at today if I rushed that process by any means. And then as far as oils go, I was introduced actually both at the same time. This year of my life was so interesting. I was invited to an essential oil workshop from now my best friend Heather, but at the time we were just acquaintances in college, and she was having this essential oil workshop. She lived a couple doors down from me, and I was like, sure, like I'll go to this thing. I'm into holistic health now, and that seems cool.
Yeah, this seems
And
aligned with it.
yeah, I was like, I'll go, why not? And I went, and I would be lying if I said I wasn't a little skeptical, because I was like, is this all like too good to be true? Like all this stuff that everyone's talking about. And once again, a seed was planted. I didn't start using essential oils immediately right away. Actually, what I did do was I started using essential oils that were not the brand of doTERRAs that I was being educated on, and the
Yeah.
company that I now work with and advocate for. I started using oils from the local food co-op because I thought that it was fine because it's a food co-op. It's
Yeah.
a
It's
local
fine.
place.
Like essential
Yeah,
oils are
exactly.
oils.
Yeah. And so I remember I started using oils in my classes once I started teaching classes. And I used tea tree oil and peppermint and lavender, which were like my trio of oils to use. And I started noticing that in class, after I would use the oils on the students, a lot of them would be having irritations to the oils, and I would put them right on their temples, literally touching their faces. And I wouldn't go as far to say, like, it wasn't like their skin was melting off, but definitely like a low key chemical burn.
Mhm.
And it happened a couple too many times where I was like, wait a second, this is not just certain students being sensitive to the essential
Yeah.
oils. There's an issue with the oils I'm using. And so I kind of started becoming afraid of using essential oils, first of all, because the last thing I want to do in my yoga classes is hurt
Yeah.
people. And about a year or so later, I eventually invested in a little starter collection of doTERRA's oils for myself. I saw my friend Heather educating on them and really started understanding the differences in the sourcing and the quality, and really the unfortunate things that are happening within the essential oil industry as a whole. So I got my own little kit that I used on myself for a really long time before I ever brought it into a yoga studio again, and started reaping the benefits once again for myself in another way through essential oils.
Mhm.
And then, just like I've done with everything else, once I started to become comfortable with something and really built a belief about it, I was like, okay, now I can share this. And so then I started incorporating them into my classes. So it kind of all happened at the same time. But if we're talking about how I started implementing it, it was yoga, oils, and then Ayurveda came last.
Which I love that you were able to like start something or be exposed to it and then like allow yourself the time to process, because I knew like it's really exciting when you dive into something. And like I feel like a lot of times like once you start diving in and you get really excited about it and you see that it's working for you, it's like I just want to dive in now and like I want to help people and so on and so forth. And like I know I have like a lot of clients even who it's like they're starting their journeys or they're starting their like businesses or whatever, and they're super passionate and excited, and we sometimes put those high expectations on ourselves of like it's gonna immediately just like take off, or it's immediately just gonna like the floodgates are gonna open type of thing. And it doesn't always happen that way. And I love that you're saying like trusting that timing and allowing things to kind of work as it goes. And like when it's that time, of course, like you have to put in the work, but of course, like when it's also the time, it's gonna happen and you're not gonna get behind or you're not gonna miss out on like your call or whatever, which is really beautiful. And I think it's also important to touch on that of like the quality of the oils that you are using, because I know even just a lot of people in my life will be like, well, those are expensive. And I'm
Mhm.
like, okay, but if you're not spending the extra $20 or the extra $10, like, and some aren't even, there's not really much of a difference. Some there is, but like, it's gonna have worse effects.
Well, and I always say too, like, what's the point in buying, if you're buying essential oils for the purpose of using them for your health,
Yeah.
what's the point of buying something that isn't going to give you those benefits? It's really a waste of money at the end of the day.
Yeah.
And, another thing to touch on too is something really interesting happened with my financial health during
Mhm.
this time in my life, because I was like a broke college student. I was legit eating croutons for dinner, and I didn't even know what vegetables were, but I saw a potential for a healthier life. And I respect and have compassion for people who may feel stuck financially, feeling like they can't live healthy lives. And I don't want to come off as not understanding that. But I will say something that helped me, especially in this period of my life, was I started just reworking where my finances went. So instead of going out for dollar beers, which ended up being like way too much money, it wasn't dollar beer night, every Tuesday night in college and going out for food every single night,
Mhm.
I started just putting my finances somewhere else. So I wasn't even spending more. I was just reorganizing where my finances went. And I think that once we prioritize what's really important to us, we start to notice that even that area of our health falls into place.
Totally. I 100% like agree with that. And I found too, when I'm investing like in my health or in my spirituality, whatever it may be, more money actually comes in, which is really interesting because there's been so many times. Like I remember like the heat of COVID, like everything was just about to lock down. I remember I went to Healthy Living, which is like a local like health grocery store around like where I live. And I had spent a lot of money on different, like, I don't know, different supplements and like vitamins and just different things that like I knew would benefit Josh and I. But it was scary also because at this point, like Josh's company, like they at that point just like laid everybody off because as soon as they heard about COVID, they were essentially like, we can't even take this risk. So he was just laid off. Like I own my own business. So you're going into it kind of like, I don't know if we should spend that extra, however much money it was. I mean, it wasn't like a tremendous amount of money, but it was enough that I was like, I should just be getting my groceries type of thing. And through that, though, like that was one of the most like it was such a successful time in my life, in my business. And I find that when I am intentionally investing in my health, everything else follows, even if it seems scary at first. And of course, I'm not saying like go out and spend like insane amounts of money that like isn't needed, but I am a firm believer in like that like leap in the net will appear type of thing. If there is something that your soul is like telling you you need this right now, or it'll find a way to you. Like I even had like little things like when I first started my business, I wanted a salt lamp. And it was something that I was like, because I was in college, I was like, I don't have the money. I don't have the money to like get something else right now. And there was an Amazon box that showed up at my house one day and I opened it. I was like, this is weird. I didn't order anything. I called my parents. They didn't order anything. And sure enough, it was a salt lamp. No idea where it came from. I was like, this is freaky. Like, what just happened? And anyway, long story short, I ended up finding out because there wasn't a return address on it. There was like nothing. I was like, what? What just happened? I was so freaked out, but I ended up finding out my aunt sent it to me.
Wow.
Like, I really feel like you would want this. She had one. She's like, it just seems like it would go really well with your business. So there are times too where it's like if your soul's really wanting it, it'll find its way to you in
100%.
some way or another.
And I always say too, there's that quote that circulates every now and again. I always repost it where it's like, if you it's you either invest now or you invest later.
Yeah.
And I don't mean to say that in a shame, guilt-ridden way for people, but if we're not taking care of ourselves now, we know what that's going to lead to. There's a very clear, I look at my family lineage and I look at some of the diseases that, some of
Yeah.
my grandparents had developed, and you get a clear picture of where you're headed if you don't take care of yourself.
Mhm.
Family, I love you, but like you're able to see that so clearly. And if you have the opportunity to invest in your health now so that way you don't go in that direction that's going to be a little bit harder, or if you're already there, if you're like, I already have a disease, like is she telling me to like that I'm a piece of crap? No, absolutely not. You have the opportunity to manage your symptoms and to be healthy now. It's not too late. It's not too late at all. So I think it's important to just have that frame of mind. It goes back to that whole not being a victim of something but overcoming instead.
Yeah, I love that. And I think that's important too because it's like you don't have to start by changing everything. Like I could be a very drastic person at times, like, okay, I want to dive all in right now, but that's not always practical. And sometimes the best thing you can do is start by drinking more water. And
Yeah.
like through that, then take the next step. Or if you want to dive into essential oils, okay, like order 2 oils,
Yeah.
lavender
100%.
and lemon or something. Like you could start with one thing that's really simple and small. Like I was just doing another interview and I was asking her, I'm like, oh, like what would be something you would recommend the listener start with and pertains to shiatsu massage? And she was like, honestly, breathing. Just breathe.
Yeah.
Like through breathing, you're gonna start to become aware of like the different like imbalances in your body, so on and so forth. So it doesn't always have to be something huge. And I love that you say that. So when we're talking about the Ayurvedic healing, what is it? Like for people who aren't sure, like aren't familiar with what it is, I would love for you to explain it for them.
Absolutely. So I will say as a preface before I really get into it, like I said before, I am so inspired to keep things simple. And so if this is your first time hearing what Ayurveda is, please give yourself grace with learning because it's a practice. So Ayurveda is a holistic practice that came from India 5,000 years ago. So it has a really deep lineage. There's a lot that goes into it, and we can easily become distracted with the facts here and there and miss the beauty of the actual science right in front of us.
Yeah.
So it essentially is a healthcare system that supports that our bodies are a reflection of nature. And
Mm,
so therefore nature has the ability to heal us and to bring us back into balance, and it does that through diet and lifestyle. So that's really what I help people with, is just shifting different habits to live more vitality filled lives. So it acknowledges root healing. really focused on the fact that healing is not just physical healing. It's healing mentally, it's healing emotionally, it's healing and taking care of our senses. And that's one of my favorite parts about Ayurveda is it's really focused on preventative care for our senses. And when you think about it, our senses is literally how we experience everything. It's how we experience the world. It's how we experience the food that we're eating. And if we're not taking care of our senses, then how are we going to experience the life that's right in front of us? And of course, it also takes into account that we have to be taking care of our soul and our spirit as well, which is very timely for the name of this podcast as well. And for those of you who are familiar with yoga, yoga is Ayurveda's sister science. And so you see a lot of similarities between the two practices. And so I learned Ayurveda through yoga, but it's actually quote unquote better if possible to learn Ayurveda first. That way you can understand your own unique body and body type, and then do the yoga that's most effective for you and where you need to balance. I did it the opposite way around. So, I wish I learned the opposite way just because I would have practiced yoga a little bit differently.
Yeah, that's interesting. So when you're working with clients, do you incorporate yoga too, or is it pretty strictly like doing the Ayurveda and
Yeah.
oils, or will you sometimes do like flows with them and stuff
If
like that?
they are interested in doing yoga, I absolutely will do that with them or just teach them
Yeah,
breathing techniques right in our consultation. That way they have it to take away with them, and that way they have that experience right there.
that's really cool. So going off of that, what are like I am kind of familiar with the archetypes, but how you're talking about this like different, like the different types of body and stuff like that. What are they?
So there are, before I get into that, I'm going to teach you about the 5 elements, just because I think that that will kind of direct a little bit better into it. So Ayurveda supports that our bodies are a reflection of nature. And so it's comprised of the 5 major elements. And so we have ether, air, fire, water, and earth. And now when I first learned about Ayurveda, I'm a very literal person. And so I was like, so they think that there's fire in me and they think there's like earth in me, and I'm confused. And I was like, what is this voodoo? And I learned very quickly that it's not the literal earth and fire, but it's the qualities. And so just some of the qualities we think of hot when we think of fire, or warm, or oily, smooth, dense, thick, like just different qualities that we can feel within our bodies and we can feel within our minds. And then moving a little bit further is the doshas. And so the doshas, if you're familiar with like the Enneagram or archetype or whatever we want to call it, is essentially your unique makeup, your physical makeup, your mental makeup, and it's comprised of the qualities. And so I'll list out just a little bit about this. So the doshas, there's 3 of them. And so there's vata, there's pitta, and there's kapha. And so vata is comprised of the elements of air and ether. Pitta is fire and water. And then kapha is water and earth. And so depending on these 3 different doshas, you might have a little bit more of pitta. You might have more of that fire quality, that fire element within your system, or maybe the vata, which is known for being very mobile. And I do offer a whole workshop on this. So if you're like, whoa, this is like a lot, what is she
Yeah.
talking about? I'm happy to break that down for you, or over on my social media, I do a ton of education about this. But as a whole, all you really need to know is that you are unique, and there is a unique way that you are made up on a physical level, on a biological level, on a mental level. And because of that, your treatment plan for your healing is going to be unique as well. And that's why I love Ayurveda. I've never given the same protocol to 2 different clients because it just simply wouldn't serve 2 people because it's so unique.
Totally. I love that. And I feel like that's so important because especially where I feel like the world's moving, we're moving into more of that uniqueness, like moving away from it's a one size fits all and like you better make it work type of thing to wait a minute. This can't be the only way.
Right.
that doesn't resonate with me. There has to be something else. So with the doshas, is it like pretty straightforward as to what somebody would be, or could it be at times like a little bit of two different doshas? How does that work?
Yeah. So I always ask people the question of like, what's your dosha and does it really matter?
Mhm.
And it does matter. Like it's definitely, if anything, it helps you to know yourself more, which I think there's a lot of value in knowing yourself more. And just, I'll use myself as an example. I have a lot of pitta in my system. And
Mhm.
so there's a lot of fire in my system. There's a lot of passion. But
Mhm.
sometimes if I'm imbalanced, that fire can easily be irritability, frustration, and anger.
Wow.
And so I know that about myself. I know that that's the direction I can kind of lean into. So I would do things to balance that out, whether it's inviting cooling foods into my diet or soaking my feet in peppermint cold water just to cool down a little bit, or just staying away from those conversations that could get me heated and riled up, whatever it may be. The self-care looks different depending on the day. So to answer your question, it does matter. But I
Mhm.
always tell people, especially when you're first learning, to really focus on those elements and those qualities first
Yeah.
instead of obsessing over the doshas.
Yeah.
Because the thing is, you definitely will have more of one dosha within your makeup, or maybe even a couple, or maybe you're mentally pitta and physically kapha.
Mhm.
But all of the doshas play a role every single day. There's an Ayurvedic clock where there's different times of day that each dosha kind of rules over, if you will. The seasons are attached to the doshas. And so we go through every single season. I don't have a lot of vata in my system,
Mhm.
but the dosha vata is kind of in charge of winter time, that cold, dry season. And so I still have to pay attention to it because my body still feels dry and cold during that season.
Mhm.
So I say focus on that and have fun with it. And you will be, I feel like every single day I'm like, that's Ayurveda. They don't know it, but that's
Yeah,
Ayurveda
that's
right
what it
there.
is.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, I love that, and it's so cool because once again, it, like, brings you back to, like, very much like you were saying at the beginning, like, the simplicity of it all, like, and it really, like, ties it's really interesting that we have this conversation right now, and I just also had a conversation about shiatsu massage because that's like Eastern medicine too, with like but Chinese medicine. And it's just interesting once again, like all the different connections between even the two in general, but like so much connected even with nature, with the elements. And it's just I think it's really cool personally because it kind of also takes our egos down a few notches because as humans, we see in the world that we just think we're so above like everything else that's happening on the planet when really we are nature as well. We
Yes.
are part of this entire like ecosystem, whatever it might be. And like the more we can understand these like ancient principles and practices, I feel like the more we're going to, in a sense, like better fit into the natural rhythm as well.
Absolutely. And I think that there's also something to be said for the compassion about learning more about yourself, but
Mhm.
also taking it a step further and learning more about the people around you. So even if I don't tell them what their dosha is, I know very much so what the people around me gear towards with their balances and imbalances. And I can have more compassion when I see that they're imbalanced in some way, even if it's as simple as the weather being different. And, same thing, I'll use myself as another example, is I don't like hot weather. Why?
Yeah.
Because I have way too much fire in me already. I don't need more heat. So I'm someone who runs hot. So hot weather doesn't really satisfy me much. So I might notice a little bit more irritability during that time of the year. And it's not, an excuse to be an a-hole, but it's just having more compassion for myself and for other people and saying, hey, okay, this is how they operate. This is how they are. And especially if they're imbalanced and they're not in rhythm at all, then you can even have more compassion for that.
Yeah,
Sure.
totally. I think it's just cool because it once again, it just like helps to make sense of why you feel the ways that you feel that a lot of times society as a whole can't really
Mhm.
explain, you know? And so I know I have like I have it right here actually, let me grab it. I have like I read this a long time ago, the Ayurvedic self-care
Ooh.
handbook. So in here, there's a lot of like different recipes, stuff like that, like different I don't know, like digestion rituals, like reading your tongue, like abdominal massage, like journaling stuff, walking in the sun, which it was really cool. So it's like not a lot of what like Ayurveda is, or is that because I'm like, I know like as you discussed, like there's so much to it. So I'm like, is it like you could focus on different areas, or is it a lot of you kind of like have based upon your elements or the doshas or whatever, different almost like protocols in the sense of like how you should like start your mornings
Right.
or stuff like
Right.
that.
So I love that book, by the way. I want that. I've never knew that book existed. Might have to get the title of that after.
You can get
But
Barnes and Noble.
no, there's what's called dinacharya in Ayurveda, which means daily rituals or daily routines. And so
Mhm.
there are some routines such as tongue scraping,
Yes.
dry skin brushing.
Yeah, I
Yeah,
got the tongue scraping, I think, from this book.
yes, yes. Oil pulling, abhyanga, which is self massage. There's these practices that are kind of the basis of really taking care of ourselves. Of course, also eating healthfully and mindfully and all of that stuff as well, but really the foundations of our health. And something such as tongue scraping, I personally would say is supportive for everyone.
Yeah.
Unless it for some reason is really unsupportive for a specific situation that someone's in. But for most people, it's really supportive practice to do and a really simple one to implement. And once you start tongue scraping, you don't go back.
Yeah.
Trust me. You start seeing what comes off of your tongue and you're like, whoa.
This is good.
Um, but so there are those kind of like foundational daily rituals that we implement, and you don't have to do it all the time. That was another misconception that when I first sat through a few Ayurveda workshops when I was first learning, I used to leave sometimes feeling like if I didn't do all these things daily, I couldn't practice Ayurveda. And most of society, we don't have time to do like a 3-hour morning routine every
Yeah.
single day. So that's where my passion of inviting simple habits comes in, or realizing that sometimes something like dry skin brushing, it's when you take there's like dry brushes that you can really
Mhm.
get them anywhere these days with the bristles, and you
Yeah.
literally brush your body. It helps with circulation, moving the lymph of the body. It's really, really effective for so many different things. But for someone who has really dry skin, probably not going to be too effective for them or supportive. Or if it's wintertime, I don't usually do it in the winter because I'm like, I'm already dry. I don't need that. So I
Yeah.
think being aware of the practices that are
Mhm.
there is important, trying them out. And if you don't like it in a way that's like, is unsupportive for your body. It's okay to feel a little discomfort, but if you know over time this is not supporting me or my health, then
Mhm.
don't do them. And then, going further than that, working with an Ayurvedic counselor, they will kind of, for the lack of a better word, prescribe, give you a protocol
Mhm.
um, towards your specific health ailments or routines that you're looking to develop. And sometimes I literally tell people to drink warm water, and that's their protocol. And I'm not going to lie, when I first started my practice, I used to feel guilty if I didn't give a cool enough regimen for people, because I was like, they just invested and I'm going to tell them to drink warm water. Like, that's really like one of the things I'm going to say to do. And so I would give them this really long, extensive list of things. And what did they do? None of it, because that's
Yeah.
overwhelming.
Overwhelming.
And now I try to keep it really bare minimum. And especially based on the person, like if I have someone telling me, like, I'm burnt out, I'm busy, homegirl's not doing a lot of stuff that I'm going to be recommending. So I got to keep it simple.
Yeah.
And I am blown away by how simplicity truly works.
Mhm.
And I've had to remind myself of that and also put my ego to the side of like being the cool Ayurvedic health counselor that gives the cool recommendations, and just see how drinking warm water or eating more vegetables. That is sometimes my recommendation is, hey, you don't have any fruits or vegetables in your diet. All I want you to do is start eating fruits and vegetables. Check back in with me in a week and let me know how you feel. Or sleeping more, or not being on your phone before bed. These really simple habits, I'm blown away all the time at how effective they are, even for myself too, when I implement them.
Totally. I love that. That's like so much of like my membership too is very much like that of like I'm giving you a lot of different tools that you can use, but they're also very like simple tools because I think I don't know. I feel like society as a whole just has this like idea of it has to be really hard and really long and drawn out in order for it to be effective or for me to be like making progress or whatever, when at the end of the day that's not sustainable.
Yeah.
Like you're not going to stick to it. And I've seen like my own practice as well. It's usually the simple things that actually make the biggest difference.
Yeah, 100%. And also, one of my teachers in Ayurveda school, her name is Dr. Rosie, and she has said so many times in my training that the act of perfecting your lifestyle is going to lead to imbalance. It's the act of trying to, I've even been guilty of this too, of just trying to have the perfect regimen for my anxiety. And then all of a sudden I feel more anxious afterwards because I'm
Mhm.
trying so hard to read the book and journal and pray and this and that and do so
Yeah.
many things where it's like, that's no one wants to do that. That's all
Yeah.
overwhelming.
Yeah, and I feel like it just leads you to feel like disempowered and like you're not good enough. Like that's what I find so much with people like on like their spiritual journeys of like I need to meditate and I need to do yoga and I need to pray and I need to journal and I need to do some tapping and da 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 and like and they like are striving to be this like impossible person to be in that sense. And like I feel like that defeats the purpose of it all because like so much of like the spiritual journey, so much of like the holistic healing journey, all of it is like doing what feels good to you. And the more you're trying to follow this like protocol that's like doesn't feel good to you and you're doing it because somebody else is telling you it's the way of like success or whatever, it like I feel like it just defeats the purpose of all of it.
100%. And I love the piece of scripture that's so simple, be still and know. Just
Yeah.
be still. And there's so much beauty in being still
Yeah.
and just allowing yourself to feel what you're feeling, notice what you're feeling. I read a book that I'll recommend. Oh my gosh, what was it called? It was The Ruthless Elimination of Hurry by John Mark Comer. And I started my year with that book this year. And it was one of those life-changing books that I have to read every year
Mhm.
because it was all about how being still and being present and resisting society's push to constantly be hurrying and doing what's next and doing the most and hustle, 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 how doing that is actually going to lead to a more fruitful life, resisting all of those things.
Mhm.
And I feel like I've been really healed from the burnout that I was in for so long, trying to figure it out, feeling like I was on some timeline when the reality is you're on no one's timeline,
Yeah.
really. And once you're able to truly release that, I mean, I say truly release, and I think there's seasons of it. Like right now, I'm in a season where I feel truly released from that, but I'm sure that will come again, and I'll have to armor myself back up in prayer and read that book.
Yeah.
But when you at least one time feel the release from that, it's liberating in so many different aspects, especially with your health journey.
Yeah, totally. Because it's like, especially with health, it's like, like a lot of people start their health journey when they're not feeling
Mhm.
well. So it's like immediately they want to find that fix. And I feel like, especially in today's society, it's all about quick fixes and
Oh yeah.
like all the diet trends, like how can I lose the amount of weight, like the most amount of weight the fastest, and like all of that. How can I just feel better the fastest when really like all that that's doing is it's putting a band-aid over something. And like I love using this example of like a little kid when the parent wants them to clean the room and they just shove everything in the closet
Yeah.
and then like the closet can't close and you open it and it overflows and there's more of a mess than if they had just put those things away to begin with. So it's like when we're trying to just continue to find those quick fixes and like we're shoving things under the rug, putting it in the closet, but eventually that closet's going to overflow or you're not going to be able to walk on the rug anymore and then you're left to deal with all of it all at once. And
Yes.
then it's like overwhelming. So would you say like when if somebody's like starting their journey, like I know you mentioned like starting with like the elements and stuff, but like is there any physical like practices you would recommend that they do start with? Like would it be, for instance, like the dry brushing or the warm water in the morning? Like is there anything like right now that they could do like as like an action step during
Right.
their
So
days?
I think that one thing could be being really clear on your vision of why you want to be healthy.
Yeah.
And because when you anchor to that,
Mhm.
my vision of being healthy is because I want to break the generational curse that's in my family. And I want to be able to pass down good genetics to my future children. And that inspires me to do everything that I'm doing, is just thinking of that, and not in a way that puts pressure on me to be perfect or anything, because I'm developing, at the least I'm developing tools to pass down.
Yeah.
And so I think getting really clear and having a really really clear purpose in why you want to be healthy, who you want to be healthy for, and having that vision that you can anchor to in the moments when you don't want to practice something that's healthy for you, anchor to that, with also knowing that there has to be grace. And then from there, I guess it would be a little different per person. However, like I said before, the tongue scraping and the foundations of, assuming that and if you're not doing this, this is where I would start, making sure you're moving your body. Maybe it's dancing, maybe it's going for a walk for 10 minutes, maybe it could be literally whatever, but moving your body, drinking a substantial amount of water. I do believe that warm water, room temperature water, is more effective, especially if you're dealing with any sort of digestive discomfort. But overall, it's more supportive for the body typically as well. So maybe just making that simple switch. Or if you're like Sabrina, I live off of cold water, I'm not going to drink water. If I do it that way, then obviously I want you drinking water. So
Yeah.
start incorporating more teas, or maybe just start the day with warm water. And I would start there. And then I want to say also tongue scraping too, because it's just so simple and so easy.
Mhm.
It's effective, it's affordable. And from there, then, if you want to incorporate essential oils or incorporate any of the other practices, once you have this like foundation, I'm a firm believer in habit stacking. So you'll never hear me advocating for just using essential oils, but doing whatever you want with your body and not actually being healthy. But maybe when you're drinking that warm water, you're adding lemon oil to it. Only doTERRAs. Please don't like go anywhere else and start ingesting the oils. But then when you start tongue scraping, maybe you start using a higher quality toothpaste afterwards, or whatever it may be. You stack on the essential oils and the products with healthy habits.
Yeah. I love that. And I feel like that will get people sticking to it because they're already doing something. So it's like, why not, after that habit's created, now start to add something else that will benefit
Yes. And I
even more?
always tell people, if you went in my bathroom, you would know exactly what I do in there. I have my dry skin brush hanging on my, like the back of this shelf that I have in there. I have the oils that I use
Yeah.
in the bathroom. Like put those things as visuals to say, oh yeah, I got to grab that. I got to use that. Because even myself having these habits really integrated, if it's not readily available to me, I'll fall short. I'll be like, whatever, I'll do it tomorrow. And then I probably won't do it tomorrow. So that's one of my biggest tools, is having those things, your oils that you put on your feet before bed, put them next to your nightstand, put them on your nightstand. That way you're actually going to use them and you don't have to get out of bed to grab them.
Yeah, I love that. I need to start doing that because it's true. Like I have, for when I think about it, I'm like, I have my like tongue scraper right in our like toothbrush
Yeah.
holder, so it's like easy. It's like, oh, okay. Like as soon as I get up, like scrape my tongue in that sense. Going off of that, actually, would you like to explain to people like why you should tongue scrape, like the
Yeah.
importance of
Yeah.
it?
So tongue scraping is exactly what it sounds like. You're scraping your tongue. And so there's these really handy gadgets that kind of look like a U. And I recommend copper if possible. It's
Mhm.
pretty unaffordable and it also is antibacterial. So has a lot of great properties to it. Copper does. So using 100% copper and literally just taking the tongue scraper to the back of your mouth, or if you are in college like I was when I first learned about this, you can use the back of a spoon if you don't want to invest in an $8 tongue scraper. That's where I was at one point. And you literally just scrape from the back of your tongue to the front. You notice all the gook that comes off, and that gook, you'll want to do that about 5 to 6 times. You'll rinse in between. That gook that's coming off of your tongue is actually well, it could be a bunch of different things. It could be bacteria, especially that's been sitting overnight, because think about it, if you're laying down horizontally, your GI system is kind of going to bring up some stuff that settles on your tongue, and you don't want that going back down, so you want to get that off of your tongue, especially before you're drinking any type of liquid in the morning, because again, you don't want to flush it
Ingestible.
back. And then there's just so many benefits in general to keeping your mouth clean and making sure that, your mouth has the healthy bacteria in it, but removing the unhealthy and unwanted bacteria in it as well, because we know that most airborne things floating around go through our mouth and through our nose. So that's one huge benefit as well. And it also helps your food to taste better. So like that's sweet.
Yeah, like that's a huge plus in it.
Yeah. Yeah.
That was something that was really interesting to me. It was like, I think it was this book that we were talking about. It might be a different one, but when she was talking about the tongue scraping, it was also like different parts of your tongue, like depending on where you notice a lot of like the buildup connects
Yeah.
with like your organs and stuff as well. And it was interesting for me because I've struggled with digestion issues for years, and like on my tongue, like where there was the most buildup was what connected with the like large and small intestines or
Yeah.
whatever. I was like, whoa.
It's so cool. It's so cool to look at that stuff and just see how our body, like there's even certain things like with your nails, like how your nails are growing in, and if there's any certain patterns on your nails, that can show, certain imbalances within the body. And that's like that stuff. I'm so glad you brought that up, because that's sometimes what I forget to educate on, because again, because I try to keep things so simple that I'm like, oh, is that going to be overwhelming? But no, that's like freaking cool. Like
Yeah.
that's so cool to be like, wait, that's who knew, and to also be an advocate for your own health, right? Like there's, like I said before, I'm all about integrative medicine and using modern medicine when necessary. But I think it's really important to be educated about your own body and be
Mhm.
aware of what's going on within your own body. That way, you at the end of the day can make the decisions for you, because no doctor ever is going to, no Ayurvedic health counselor even is going to know what's going on in your body and what you're personally feeling. And so we are our biggest advocates for our health.
Yeah, totally, totally. And I think that's so important because it's so easy for us in today's world, especially to give our power away, whether it is to a doctor or if it is to your health coach or to an Ayurvedic health counselor. Like, I feel as though it's like just so easy for us to be like, oh, well, they know more than me.
Right.
Even though your body's screaming at you, like, no, like, this is actually what you need. But we so easily will just kind of fall into whatever we're being told because we follow what we're told.
And in some ways, it's, dare I say, easier to do
Yeah.
that. Like it's easier to just nod your head and say, okay, this person must be right, instead of doing the work to actually get to know yourself and really heal. It's hard. It's not like fun by any means at times. It can be.
It's like a lot of facing your own stuff and also like standing up like for yourself. I feel like is really challenging in itself at times. Like I know I experienced that when I had literally every bad side effect I could have from my birth control, and like my body was like screaming at me to like, you need to get off of it. Like this is not helping you anymore. Like it was fine for a while. And I mean, I was prescribed to birth control to begin with because my periods were horrible, which now the more I learn about it, I'm like, oh my gosh, like that was so bad because I wasn't just like, not to be like TMI, but like
No.
the amount of blood that would come out of me, literally, I mean, it was outrageous. It was scary how much blood would come out. And it would be like such bad cramps. Like I'd be at school, like hunched over at my desk because I was just in so much pain. But nobody wanted to look into why I was in that much pain. It was just, oh, birth control, that'll help you. And at the time, it did. So I was like, cool. Anything that will like help solve this right now, great. But I was only like 16. So I didn't realize that, wait a minute, there could be like actual reasons for this besides just like an easy fix here. And like now I'm like, oh my gosh, like there could have been so many other things that were going wrong. But when I told my doctor, who had always been so nice to me, like even when I started my business, she's like, oh, like I want your business cards, like so on and so forth. But when I started questioning my birth control, she like, it was like something switched. And she was like, well, are your ankles and wrists swollen? And I was like, I mean, my whole body is swollen. Like, I don't know what you mean. Like, I'm so disgustingly bloated. I feel like I've never been pregnant before, but I'm like, I feel like I'm like 6 months pregnant constantly. Like, I just feel disgusting. And she's like, well, if your ankles and wrists aren't swollen, it is not your birth control. And like, just basically like shut me down, would not talk about it. And I left like so flustered and like really just like kind of like shaken because she was being so condescending to me. And I'd never seen that side of her. And once that, it kind of made me feel like, okay, am I just like making all of this up in my head? Like, is there actually just like, this is just like what I have to deal with? Like, this is just my body. And like, luckily, I kind of like just kept following my intuition and was like, no, like, fuck that. I'm going off of it. And sure enough, a few months went by and I felt completely better. But that wasn't easy. And honestly, I never went back back to her because I felt so uncomfortable. And like, it wasn't like I struggled with standing up for myself to begin with. So like having to experience that was like really challenging. So it's not always easy also when somebody's telling you something, especially when you really view them in a very positive way, like you really respect them.
Mhm.
It's not always easy to then go
Yeah.
against what they're telling you.
I completely agree. And I also had a very similar experience with the birth control thing.
Mhm.
And this honestly, you asked me earlier what my turning point was, and this was one of them. And around the same time, kind of maybe a couple years later, and I just had this intuition to get off
Mhm.
of birth control. I wasn't even having negative symptoms. I just knew that in the coming years I would want to start a family, and it just seemed like if I wanted to start a family, I probably shouldn't be on birth control
Yeah.
long term. I just felt intuitively that that
Mhm.
wasn't right. And I expressed all of that so vulnerably to a gynecologist that I was going to at the time, and I got scolded. And the scolding process was actually, it was like, you realize you can get pregnant now. And so
Yeah, that was like the whole thing. Well, how are you going to
yeah,
like how are you going to prevent pregnancy? I'm like,
right,
I mean, there's a lot of other ways. Like, what?
yeah.
And why am
And it
I on
was
birth control to begin with?
right. And I remember questioning. I did question. I don't know where the cojones came from, because at that time I was not great at standing up for myself in that
Yeah.
season of my life. But I remember just like feeling so passionate about it and just being like, or there's no possibility that there's there's a negative to being on this pill. There's no possibility at all. And I remember it being like, no, this is completely safe. And it's like, that's crazy, because even from a holistic perspective,
Mhm.
there's some essential oils and there's some plants out there that are not supportive for certain people. And so
Yeah,
for someone to say, nope, it's all good,
100%,
that
no
hurt.
matter what, it's like,
Yeah.
yeah,
And I also remember her saying, your periods are going to get terrible, you're going
yeah,
to break out so bad, and all these things. And those things actually did happen. I did break out really bad, but again, my whole thought process was, okay, do I do that now or later? Because eventually,
right.
when I want children, I'm going to have to
Yeah,
get off of this thing. And how are you benefiting from this? That
yeah,
that was my biggest thing, was someone
yeah.
who was genuinely for my health would not be pushing this narrative. And
Mhm.
and I understand that there are certain doctors and nurses out there who are so on board with integrative health and for people's health, and they get into it for the right reasons. But when you have an experience like that, it makes you question certain practices that are happening. And I remember I got off of birth control, started breaking out so terribly. I've shared a lot about that on social media, but that's what led to my healing journey. And that's what allowed me to see what was being controlled for so many years. And, there was that band aid of birth control over my inflammation in my body that was not able to really come to the surface. And I got to just really see like what was going on underneath it all. And I had to change how I was eating and everything about my health. And then that's what really inspired me. And also the reason why I get so passionate about this too is because I think about those people, especially women, who don't feel strong enough in their voice to stand up for themselves, stand up to a doctor who's hiding behind a credential that, they think they're
I got
invincible because they're a
it.
doctor. Like, who
Yeah.
cares, really, honestly? Um, and that's why I get so passionate. I'm like, I will take one for the team here. I'll stand up for it. Like, if I have to, I will, because it's just reality. Like, it's just, yeah.
I really like honor that about you, that you have that ability and also like grace to stand up for things when there is like kind of like the integrity isn't there, like because it is so important. And I feel like it's really easy for us to just kind of turn away don't look, don't be the one that stands up because it's uncomfortable or you're going to get canceled or like whatever else. When at the end of the day, when it's something that you're standing up with that integrity rooted in love,
Mm-hmm.
it's wrong. If you're wanting to look at it in that sense, right or wrong, which I don't really like to look at it in that way,
Yeah.
but just for like speaking purposes, like it's actually wrong to not stand up.
Right. Especially if you
I
feel
know.
like passion
Yeah,
on your heart to do it.
totally. Because I know it's not easy. I was very much like thought like be the good girl that doesn't say anything, that's quiet, that like just
Mhm.
goes with what she's told, even if your entire body's screaming at you to not do something, like do what
Right.
you're told.
At the expense of like comforting other people or
Yeah, and you
whatever
can
it may
be
be.
miserable while everybody else feels good. That's okay.
Yep.
But
Been
that's
there.
interesting that you were also talking about the acne and the breakout. Because I feel like it was this book or another book I'd read about Ayurvedic healing was like also where your acne is like breaking out on your face is like a good indicator on the different organs that might be
Yeah.
inflamed or out of balance. Is that correct?
Yeah, absolutely. And even of course, tracking with your cycle, seeing if that has
I didn't even
anything to do with it as well. It usually does. And one note too that I just like, it's kind of going a little off topic, but not too much, is when we were talking earlier about our experiences with birth control and periods and stuff. That indication right there makes me really passionate too, because if you're looking right now, I had this like revelation recently as I was kind of studying, where I was like, okay, from young girls right now, like there are girls are getting their periods younger and younger and younger, like 9, 8, 7 years old. That's real young to be getting periods.
Mhm.
And then, going into the teenage stage, there's a lot of hormonal disruption going on there, whether it's with our all of it is connected obviously, but there's mental health struggles that's really severely happening in that age group, especially acne all over all the time, and to some degree, like, yes, a little bit is normal.
Right.
There's normal imbalances that happen, but we're also kind of covered with that band-aid of it's normal.
Yeah.
And it's like, but is it, right? Like I was always told it's normal to be breaking out when you're a teenager. Yeah, okay, it might be, but like, can we not? Can we focus on something that can help that's not proactive,
Right. Like,
skincare only?
yeah, like why can't we actually like try to
Right.
find something that would help?
Right. And then looking at, much of my practice is women that are around my age group or
Mhm.
older. And I'm seeing the same thing. Women around my age group to about, 35 maybe, they're having trouble conceiving these days. And fertility is a big problem. And then past that, women that I work with, um, menopause, having really debilitating seasons of menopause. And so we're seeing across the whole spectrum that there's an issue going on. And obviously, there's so many things that we can dive into there. Even just the hormones pumped in our foods is a problem. And also, to like, for the guys listening, like, it's happening with men's health too. I'm personally not as versed in that or
Yeah,
focused on that, but I know
Josh
that's
was
happening
talking
too.
a lot about that. He's getting really big into all that of like testosterone levels and stuff and like how each generation like it's like I don't know, different the levels are getting like smaller and how it connects with essentially like stuff that's in the foods and chemicals, like all of it. So it's definitely happening on
Yeah,
that
it's
side of things.
crazy. And I think it's just important to bring awareness to that, knowing that it's not targeted towards one group of people or one age group. It's everyone that's dealing with something. And I think that's enough to just have us start opening our eyes and raising our eyebrows a little bit towards certain things and becoming advocates for our own health and looking into things for ourselves.
Totally. I think that's so, so, so important. And I think that's why a lot of this is happening right now because it's bringing us to that point of like systems needing to break down because just one size fits all is no longer going to work. And it's almost like sometimes things have to get loud. Like I was just saying, I was saying it to somebody of like sometimes we have to get to those points of like rock bottom or like extreme discomfort for us to finally wake up, for us to finally make the change. Like, you know what, this isn't working for me anymore. It needs to make some sort of change. I've even looked into like I've looked a lot into actually like periods, menstrual cycles, all of that. And even just down to like little things of like how back hundreds of years ago when women were like experiencing their periods, they wouldn't work. Like they wouldn't do things like forcing their bodies to do things that should not have been done. Like I'm seeing more and more people, and I know like not everybody has this ability right now, but like I've seen a lot of entrepreneurs who will literally take that week while they're like having their period, they will take that week off because you're not like your body is supposed to be using that time to rest. But especially in corporate America, we're taught like, no, suck it up, deal with it. You have period cramps. Wow, like go
Yeah.
take Midol or an
Right.
like whatever it might be to numb that a little bit
Mhm.
because you have a long day of work ahead. And it's like we're just like forced to do things without really realizing like going back to even what you're talking about, like with the fingernails, all of that, or like the acne and like breaking out, like your body is telling you something for a reason and it needs you to listen. And by forcing your way through, it's not going to benefit you. It's only going to make things worse.
Right. 100%. I love that you brought that up because I'm so passionate about period health. And especially when you're on your period or the coming days of your period, it's normal to an extent to feel irritable, but
Mhm.
I believe that that irritability is mostly happening because of the fact that we aren't giving ourselves the opportunity to rest during
Yeah.
that time and to give ourselves grace. And so, when our body is doing something like having a period, there's a lot of energy going into having a full period, and you're literally bleeding. Like, no, in no other time would people expect you to like go on with normal life when you're gushing blood.
Yeah.
And
That's
I
so
think it's important to just have that awareness. And again, I know that that's not something that all of us can just, you know,
do.
yeah, do is take off of work or whatever, but can we at least have the grace with ourselves to know I'm not going to show up my 100%, like this is what's
Yeah,
happening,
and
and
that's
I'm just not
okay,
going to.
right?
Yeah.
Or
and
like
and have,
after work, if you have a friend that wants to
yeah,
go out and you just know your body enough to say like, not this week.
yes, 100%, and keeping that like tracked. And if you're blessed enough to have a period that's normal,
Mhm.
a normal cycle, put it in your calendar. Like I put it in my calendar and I see,
Wow.
like, I kind of schedule around it. So for example, if I was on my period, I probably wouldn't have scheduled this podcast for this week because I know my brain doesn't function as well as it does not on my period. I know that my thoughts are a little brain foggy sometimes and that I can't give my all into my energy with this. And so that's something to like keep track of that. I think that there's a lot of wisdom in knowing when that time of the month is happening and just being more in tune with your body with that as well.
Yeah, no, I love that. And I love really like everything that you're sharing with us about all of that because it's really like your body's going to give you the
Mhm.
signs. Your body's telling you what you need. It's just a matter of slowing down, listening, and creating that practice that feels good to you. So to wrap things up, I feel like a fun question, or maybe a few fun questions. What would be your like go-to essential oil for people who are wanting to dive in, or maybe they have essential oils, but like what would be like your go-to or recommendation for just like the typical person?
Okay, so just like a typical person,
Mhm.
I always recommend what's in what we call the top 10 essential oils. And so oils like that, let's narrow it down to the top 3. Would be lemon, lavender, and peppermint. Those 3 are like the trio blend that you can do so much with just those 3. Also, what I really love is those are kind of the most common essential oils wor- like I don't say nationwide. What am I trying to say here? Across the whole board, it's like those are the most common oils.
Yeah.
And so you will notice if you're using a brand that is of a lower quality or if it's a perfume and not actually essential oils, you'll be able to notice from brand to brand
Yeah,
what's
for sure.
authentic and what's not, just by those 3 that are really commonly seen. So that's probably where I would start. And then if you wanted to go a step further, going into like an introduction kit with the top 10 essential oils. That's what I started with.
Mhm.
I believe it's called the Healthy Start Kit. The name has changed recently, but that's what I personally started with. And it was just the top 10 essential oils. And I just started implementing them on a daily basis in different ways. And that's something that I obviously do is support you with education on how to do that. Don't feel like you're in the dark with learning that yourself. but just starting there and seeing what you like to use certain things for, and know that you don't have to implement them in every single way possible. There's like, with one bottle of oil, you can probably do like 100 things, no joke. So you don't have
Yeah.
to do all of them, but just start somewhere.
Yeah, I love that. And what would you say is like your preferred way? Like diffusing, applying to your body? Like, what would be like your
Sure. So I definitely diffuse, use them topically and internally on a daily basis personally. But for a beginner, and when I was first starting, I was only diffusing mostly, or at least putting them on the bottoms of my feet. And the reason why that's really effective, especially when I teach yoga classes, is because when you're taking in the aromatherapy benefits of essential oils, you're working with a part of your brain called the limbic brain, which is in charge of your emotions and your memory and your mood. And so it can have a really dramatic effect on you in so many different ways, but especially for mental health, which is what I'm really passionate about. So I would start there.
Yeah, I love that. I love that. And I love that like you're talking about the brain. Because I've been a lot like I even though like I'm so into all the like spiritual side of things, I love all the science and being
Yeah.
able to like find the like factual like
Yeah.
evidence of it, I guess you could say at the same time. And like there's been a lot of like research done in like recent times of like how the different oils like actually are at like different frequencies of energy, and those different frequencies really do like that's how they'll say like how like lavender might be like for stress release or like help with anxiety at times, like calming the body. It's literally because like it's operate like there's a vibrational frequency to it, scientifically like proven, that connects with
Mhm.
that energy in your body, which is
There's
like
a
cool.
there's a good book. It's right here. There's a good book called, it's this one right here for those of you who are watching the recording, called Essential Emotions.
Ooh.
You can get it on, I think, essentialemotions.com probably, but also aromatouch or oillife.com. One of those has it. And it goes through every single essential oil, and it's linked with doTERRA's essential oils. And it gives you the history of what the essential oils were used for, specifically with emotional health. And you can also look up different emotions and then be able to see like what oils should I use to help me process this emotion. And that's what I love so much too. It's not about getting rid of that emotion. Like anger, for example, is like not a fun positive emotion necessarily, but this book teaches you to move through that, not just get rid of it. It actually helps you to process that emotion in your body, which is important.
Yeah, I love that. And I love how it just like all connects, and it's
Mhm.
really, really cool. And I just thank you so much for being here with us and sharing all of your knowledge and wisdom. And I know everybody's going to want to know how they can find you, how they can work with you. As always, like all the links will be in the show notes, but I would love for you to share a little bit more with our listeners. Like, what do you have
Sure.
going on? Where can they find you?
Of course, of course. So you can find me over on Instagram. My handle is literally just my name. So it's at Sabrina Bonaiuto. That's where I do most of my educating. I am on TikTok nowadays, which feels weird to say, but it's been fun over there. That's Sabrina.Bonaiuto. And then as far as working with me, I actually offer free Ayurvedic health consultations to anyone who starts with a starter kit of essential oils. And my intention behind that is I want to keep this as affordable as possible for people. And I want to be able to do this for as long as possible in this way. And so if that's something that anyone would like to take me up on, I'd be so happy to offer that to you and to support you in your process of whatever it is that you're working on within your health. And yeah, like I said, tons of free education. I host workshops now and again that you can keep up with over on my social as well. And I would love to just connect with you regardless of where you're at.
I love your Instagram and your TikTok, like so much information. And I feel like you just do such a beautiful way of explaining things in a way that like the typical person can understand. Because even for me, I'm really into all the like holistic modalities and all that. But at the end of the day, like even like for instance, like this book, there was so much, like I loved it, but there's also so much that it can be really overwhelming of like, where do I start? Where do I begin? Like, what is like the best things to be doing? And like, what's better? What's worse? Like, so on and so forth. And I feel like you just have such a beautiful way of explaining things, and it just makes sense.
Thank you so
So,
much.
yeah, of course. Thank you. And thank you for showing up and just serving and supporting the world in such a beautiful way. I know our listeners are going to want to find you and connect with you. And so I'm super excited for that. But thank you so much for being here
Of
today.
course. Thank you for having me.
Yeah.